All right, continuing on with Chapter 10, this is Video C, and we're going to start with Section 5 of your notes, talking more about some other federal laws concerning broadcasting and cable. First off, rules concerning children's television. The Children's Television Act imposed an obligation on TV stations to serve the informational and educational needs of children. A couple of the major issues revolving around this particular ruling is that you could only have a maximum of 12 minutes of commercials per hour of children's programming during the week. On the weekends, that gets cut down to 10 and a half minutes, that should say. 10 and a half minutes of commercial time on the weekends, 12 minutes of commercial time during the week. In 1997, the FCC ruled that TV stations had to present a minimum of 3 hours per week of educational programming. So whenever you turn on the television, many times stations nowadays kind of do it in that 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. time block on Saturdays. Those various shows where you see the E/I in the corner of the screen, that is the station's way of saying we are maintaining that mandate for educational programming for children. This is one of the shows that we're using to do that. Now, an update back in 1999, the requirement here was reworded to say not 3 hours a week, but 156 hours a year, which averages the 3 hours a week. But one of the ways that a television station can fulfill the requirement is to provide 2 hours of educational programming a week and then do special blocks of children's educational programming throughout the year if they wanted to. Or if they just keep with 3 hours a week, they're also fulfilling the requirement. Copyright law. In its simplest terms, the current copyright law protects works that are fixed in any tangible means of expression. So this includes all sorts of creative works, CDs, DVDs, dramatic works, motion pictures, TV programs, computer programs, sculptures, anything that shows a bit of originality and creativity can be copyrighted. Now, some things are not copyrightable, like ideas. News events cannot be copyrighted. Now, the way that you present the news, the style of the news, the wording of the news, those things can be copyrighted, but the news itself cannot. Even though a work has been copyrighted, others can borrow limited amounts from the material under the doctrine of fair use. Now, this would basically be as a means to be able to show an example of a certain type of work or to give commentary about a certain type of work, to mention it in terms of academic research and things like that. But to just take someone else's work and try to profit from it or to use it for personal entertainment without acknowledgement of the work or purchasing the rights to the work, that is illegal under copyright law. Music licensing. Private music licensing organizations were established to grant the appropriate rights and to collect and distribute royalty payments. You see the acronyms on your screen here. ASCAP, BMI, and CSAC are the big three that have been around for quite a while. In the past few years, a fourth group has been trying to establish itself, Global Music Rights, GMR. And there's still a little bit of ambiguity about their legitimacy and significance. It's been an issue that's been ongoing in the industry for a few years now, and has kind of thrown a bit of a monkey wrench into the works of making sure that songwriters are paid appropriately for the use of their content on particularly radio stations, but TV as well. The major licensing firms grant what is known as a blanket right, whereby media firms pay a single fee to the licensing agency, and in return, the stations get performance rights to the agency's entire music catalog. So the main licensing agencies are all going to have different artists and different works that are part of their library. So most stations are going to have agreements with at least the big three licensing agencies so that they can have access to just about all the copyrighted works that are out there. But if for whatever reason you choose to only have an agreement with, say, BMI and not with ASCAP, then if an artist is represented only by ASCAP and you don't have that agreement with them, then you can't use their content legally unless you pay the writers directly for that particular instance and that particular use. Copyright and the Internet. The DMCA, the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, governs copyright enforcement and payment of copyright royalties where internet media is concerned. The rules are different for broadcasting, quote unquote, music over the internet as it is for broadcast entities, largely because internet streams can be picked up around the world. They're not limited to a geographic area, as is the broadcast environment. So there tends to be more nuanced and, by and large, more expensive rules when it comes to getting rights to air copyrighted content on the internet. Now, obscenity, indecency, and profanity. Profanity is technically defined as the irreverent or blasphemous use of the name of God. Now, many people have also expanded that to basically include swear words, and the definition of a swear has changed over time. But the literal definition, the government definition, is the one you see there on the screen. As far as being obscene, to be obscene, a program must contain material that depicts or describes in a patently offensive way certain sexual acts defined in state law. It must appeal to the prurient interests of the average person, applying contemporary local community standards. Prurient, by the way, meaning tending to excite lust. There's a new word for you. And lacking serious artistic, literary, political, or scientific value. So, a good example of this would be several years ago, NBC did a showing of the movie Schindler's List. And there is a scene in Schindler's List where you see a lot of people in a quote-unquote shower, and they're all naked. But because of the nature of that nudity and what it was depicting in the scope of the story, it was relevant and it was important in the telling of the story. Therefore, by FCC standards, it was not obscene. Broadcast indecency. Well, as far as that goes, something broadcast would be indecent if it depicts or describes sexual or excretory activities or organs in a fashion that's patently offensive according to contemporary community standards for the broadcast media at a time of day when there is a reasonable risk that children may be in the audience. So this is where we are trying to protect innocent little eyes, as it were, of the things that may be broadcast into people's homes. Now, those of you that are familiar with George Carlin may know the bit, the 7 dirty words that you can't say on television. It actually wound up that bit actually made its way to the Supreme Court because a radio station aired that comedy bit in its entirety, unedited, and somebody called the FCC on them. Well, what wound up happening over the course of time in various court cases, the Supreme Court ruled that the FCC is allowed to regulate indecent programming. They said, yeah, they can determine what is indecent and they can enforce broadcasters to follow those rules. The FCC and the courts did agree to what was called a safe harbor provision. This basically protects indecent material that's aired between 10 p.m. and 6 a.m. It is the time that those things are more acceptable to air. So you can see more risque sorts of content during those overnight hours. Also, something that continues to be debated about are the issues of fleeting expletives and fleeting nudity. Currently, those things are not fined by the FCC. There was a time that they were, and those issues continue to be talked about. So it's not completely over that, at least at the moment, those things are not being fined by the FCC, but that doesn't mean that that's always going to be the case. Indecent content and cable, as far as that goes, the courts argue that cable is not as pervasive as broadcasting because broadcasting, you set up an antenna, you can pick it up, but cable, you have to order it and pay additional fees for it. It's also not as easily accessible to children because of various things like passwords and lock boxes and all those sorts of things. Indecency and the internet. Now, the government has had a hard time getting any sort of regulation in on that. The internet has very much been seen as a freedom of expression sort of venue, and there really hasn't been a lot of movement to be able to protect children from various types of adult content that is out there. There are some rules that are in place, such as, someone confirming that they're age 18 or older, sometimes requiring a credit card number and that sort of thing. But they're not foolproof measures for protecting children from certain sorts of content on the internet. So that continues to be an issue. Equal employment opportunities. Broadcasters and cablecasters are bound by federal law prohibiting job discrimination based on race, color, sex, religion, or national origin. Further, they must adhere to regulations set down by the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. So you cannot be denied a job because you're a certain color or a certain gender, or you subscribe to a certain faith system, or you come from a certain country. There are ways to mitigate against that through the court system, but broadcasters are all bound to be equal opportunity employers. All right, and with that, we will take a break here. We'll finish up the notes with the next video, Part D of Chapter 10.